Welcome back, everybody. This is the Horn Takes podcast, your very rough around the edges Texas sports talk destination. I'm your host, Sean Redfern. It's Friday Eve. That means it's prediction Thursday. Y'all know we normally do the predictions on Friday, but it's a short week for us. So we're going to handle that today. We want to make sure we get all this content up on the TikToks, up on the Twitters. Plates at the table for the Texas Longhorns. I know you guys have seen that program movie. Plates at the table, dude smashing his head through car windows, losing his damn mind. Latimer, right? Plates at the table for Texas. It's just time to go finish. We'll have our Trace Otra Games Championship Weekend edition today. We'll do 4 keys and a prediction for the Big 12 title game. And then the playoff committee, y'all, is just an absolute clown show right now. We'll talk about that as well. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. Like us, follow us, subscribe us. Do all those things at all those places. We would surely appreciate it. Won't cost you guys a thing. If you just like to listen to podcasts, you can subscribe and support us on that as well. HornTakesPodcast.buzzsprout.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Trace Otra Games Championship Edition. Start off with that Pac-12 championship game. Number 5, Oregon. At number 3, Washington. This one kicks at 7 p.m. Central Time on ABC Friday night. Oregon, 10-point favorite in this one. This one's bounced around between 9, 9.5, 10. That's a really big line for a championship game, and it's a really big line in favor of a team that's already gotten beat once this season by Washington. For Oregon, it's a chance to avenge that only loss. It's a play into the college football playoff and an opportunity to win the Pac-12 championship. For Washington, it's a play into the college football playoff, remain perfect on the season, and win that Pac-12 championship. To me, this game comes down to defense. We all know both of these offenses are really, really good. But I think Oregon is much better on defense than Washington is. I had this game in one of our Trace Otra games earlier this season. I really liked Oregon. Didn't happen for me. I still like Oregon, and I like Oregon pretty big in this one. I think I didn't get a chance to watch the whole game, but I know there were some questionable kind of go-for-it type moments inside the 10-yard line for Oregon that they weren't able to convert on. And had they just kicked field goals, that game probably doesn't go into overtime. Washington has sputtered really bad down the stretch, just have not looked as good offensively. The defense has played okay. Just doesn't look like the same type of team to me. Not as explosive. But the talent's there. I don't care. I've got Oregon winning this one 40-23 in the Pac-12 championship game. SEC championship game, number 8 Alabama at number 1 Georgia. It's a Saturday kick at 2 p.m. Central Time on CBS. Georgia is a 6-point favorite as of this broadcast. This game's the 2-time defending national champs with a 29-game winning streak versus the greatest of all time, Nick Saban, and those 11-1 Crimson Tide from Alabama. Only loss for Alabama this season was to Texas in week 2. I feel like this game has absolutely massive college football implications, college football playoff implications. We can talk about, and we will talk about all of this a little bit later in the show, but all the games have playoff implications, I feel like. Certainly the Pac-12 championship game does. The Big 12 championship game does. The ACC championship game does. I don't know that the Big 10 championship really does. I mean, what if Iowa beats Michigan? I don't know that you keep Michigan out there, or I don't know that they would keep Michigan out there. There's probably a scenario where that happens, but I haven't really thought about it because I don't think that's going to happen. But this SEC championship game can really change a lot of things about who winds up in this playoff. Winning, you're in. for either one of these teams, I think, and losing you're in maybe for one of these teams. I think you look at these two teams statistically, they're very evenly matched. Georgia's just a slight bit better in almost every major statistical category. I think where Georgia really has an edge over Alabama is just in their pure passing game. They average about 70 yards more a game through the air than Alabama does. On the flip side, though, you got Jalen Milroe. Got to be an X factor. He's an X factor in any game he's playing in. He's a huge part of Alabama's running game, like planned running game. And then he's also really good at just escaping pressure in the pass game, picking up yards, or finding guys downfield and getting them the football. A lot of Bama's biggest plays over the top this season have been when Jalen Milroe has to move around in the pocket or get out of the pocket because there's pressure, and he can just keep plays alive and find guys running deep. I really think this is going to be one of those kind of old-fashioned, SEC slugfest that really made the conference kind of popular back in the late 2000s. When everybody started talking about how the SEC is just kind of a mini NFL. That all started late in the 2000s when they just started to physically pummel each other, especially at the top of the conference. And I feel like that's what this one's kind of going to be again. I think Georgia makes it 30 in a row and wins in a very, very close game against Alabama. I think Georgia wins this one 27-23 in Atlanta. ACC championship game, you got number 14 Louisville at number 4 Florida State. It's a Saturday, 7 p.m. Central Time kick on ABC. Florida State's a 2.5-point favorite. But Florida State's limping in without their quarterback, their main guy, the guy that has really carried that team offensively all season. On the flip side, you got Louisville. They're limping in, licking wounds after a 38-31 loss to a 6-5 Kentucky team. Florida State's advantage, I think, they run the ball okay, but they've really been like advantage passing. And that's gone now. And I think a bad Florida team managed to outgain them last week in that game. I know it was a rivalry game. I know it was on the road. But I think if it weren't for penalties and turnovers, FSU probably doesn't win that game in the Swamp on Saturday night. Louisville, really good rushing team and really good at stopping the run. And I think if you're really good at stopping the run, you got a really good shot at this Florida State team today. I think Louisville's going to upset Florida State. I think they get it done 27-17 in the ACC championship game. On to the Big Ten championship game. We debated whether to do one of these two games because it's usually 3 games, but there's 4 other major conference games. We decided to be fair and do all of them, but this has got to be like the worst game ever. Number 16, Iowa at number 2, Michigan, Saturday night, 7 p.m. kick Central Time on Fox. Michigan's a 22-point favorite in this game. And folks, you can just call this one the boring bowl. Iowa cannot score. I didn't even go back and look, but I think Iowa averages it's less than 20 points a game, I think. I could be wrong. Michigan likes to line up with 11, 12, 13 dudes in the box every single play. Their quarterback, they win games with their quarterback going 6 for 7 for 67 yards, shit like that. This game is going to be so painfully awful to watch. And I'm kind of glad I don't have to watch it, at least all of it. I'll be on a plane coming back from Dallas when this one kicks. I think this game's going to look a lot like a 1990s Texas high school football playoff matchup with just two teams that are so boring offensively, but just are going to I mean, they're going to thump each other up defensively. There's no doubt about that. I see the defense is kind of ruling this game early on. Michigan's going to win this game. I don't think it's going to be by 22 points, but I do have Michigan kind of pulling away really, really comfortably late, winning this one 30-9. I mean, that Hawkeye offense is going to make some mistakes, right? I mean, they cannot score. They're going to turn the ball over. That's what's going to lead to this blowout. So there you go. There's our Trace Otra games for the championship weekend. It's time for 4 keys and a prediction for the Big 12 title game. To me, this is a very simple blueprint for Texas. If Texas does these 4 things, they have a almost impossible shot to lose this game. Key number 1, you got to take Ollie Gordon out of the game. Ollie Gordon is the best running back in the country. He leads the nation in rushing, almost 1,600 yards. He's got 20 touchdowns. Huge, huge weapon. Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He's probably going to win the Doak Walker Award. So how the hell do you stop this guy? How do you take Ollie Gordon out of the game? Well, I think there's a few things Texas has to do. They got to win first down. That means they got to win first down on defense, which means they're going to keep Okie State behind the chains. They need to win first down on offense as well. Keep that Oklahoma State offense off the field. They got to populate the football. We always hear Sark talk about populating the football. They did it against Taj Brooks, and it took all of them. Every single one of those white hats that showed up against Taj Brooks last Friday night was needed to tackle that big man. And Ollie Gordon's a big guy too. They're going to need to get around him and put a lot of hats on him. Offensively, Texas is going to need to score early and often, a lot like they did against Texas Tech. You got to put them in a position where they don't feel like they can catch up running the football exclusively. They got to play clean defensively. That means no stupid ass offsides penalties. That means no pass interference bullshit on 3rd and long. That means being clean when you're making contact with the quarterback and hitting players near the sidelines. Play physical on the corners, but play fair. I think if Oklahoma State can get Ollie Gordon going, it's going to be a real long night for Texas. Not that they couldn't win the game. It just makes it a lot harder to win the game if Oklahoma State can establish Ollie Gordon. Key number 2, Texas got to pound the rock. Texas is coming off a 300+ yard rushing performance where they averaged 7 yards per carry with their 3rd, 5th, and 6th running backs to start the season. Those guys almost got 3 times the carries that the starter got, C.J. Baxter. C.J. Baxter had 9 carries in this game. Those 3 guys combined for 26 carries in this game. So they did all that damage with guys that if you looked at the beginning of the season were 3rd, 5th, and 6th on the depth chart in the running back room. And they did it with a lot of the whole 4th quarter was all backup offensive linemen. This running game's put up 425 yards in the last 2 games. Oklahoma State is 102nd in the country against the run. So if you're Texas, you got to think you're going in there and you're going to try to run the football. You got to think you're more physical than they are. So you got to go do it. If Steve Sarkisian says we're running the football, just like we talked about in the Tech game last week, when it's time and Sark says, let's go run the football, you guys got to be able to go run the football, win the situation, right? I think the situation offensively for Texas is going to be, we're going to go try to run the football. So those bigs up front got to get their minds right. Got to get ready for a physical game. Texas absolutely has to be able to run the football to win this game. Key number 3, hit the deep ball. That was one of our keys last week. We called it the long ball. Maybe the football gods hated us for that because that's technically a baseball term. So we changed it up this week. We did not hit the deep ball, did not hit the long ball last week against Texas Tech. I think we're going to need to do that against Oklahoma State. So if Texas can be successful running the football, Oklahoma State's going to have to do something. They're not just going to sit there and let Texas run the ball down their throats. And so when Oklahoma State starts making those adjustments, I think you're going to see Sark kind of pick his spots to take his shots downfield. So when that situation comes up, this Texas offense needs to be ready to execute that, which means the offensive line's got to protect Quinn Ewers. The wide receivers have to get open, which I think they will. They've been open. I mean, Texas wide receivers have been running down the field deep against opposing secondaries since Steve Sarkisian got to Texas. We have just done a really poor job from the quarterback position at getting those guys the ball, or a really poor job along the offensive line of giving the quarterback enough time to get those guys the ball. And then Ewers has got to throw an accurate ball. And I don't think accurate means he drops it right in the breadbasket, right in stride, and the guy takes it down the sideline for a touchdown every single time. I just think you got to give your guys a chance. We've seen Quinn Ewers miss, and I think a lot of it has to do with his shoulder. I'm not trying to bag on him at all, but we've seen him miss the last few weekends pretty bad on some deep balls. Some of them would have been touchdowns, easy touchdowns. I think good is good enough on the deep ball. Great would be amazing. Great makes this a blowout. Good just means you're connecting on some of these plays and you keep the defense honest. I'm okay with that. Key number 4, play 4 quarters. We've been talking about this Texas team all season long. How they've either showed up in the first halves, kind of faded away in the second half, or they just completely didn't show up and then just exploded in the second half. To win the Big 12 championship and to do it in a manner that the playoff committee gives you any respect at all, they're going to have to play 4 quarters. We've seen them show up late we've seen them peter out against Houston, K-State, TCU. It's been a problem closing out games since really around midseason. Look at Oklahoma State on the other side. They got a pattern of starting slow and then having some really strong finishes down the stretch. They were down 23-19 against Houston. Scored 24 second half points against Houston. Only giving up 7 in that second half. Down 24-6 at halftime against BYU last weekend. And everybody across Twitter land starts saying, all right, we got our matchup. We got Texas versus Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. They shut BYU out in the second half outside of the final few seconds where BYU kicked a field goal to tie it. Oklahoma State only gave up 10 points in the second half to Oklahoma in that win. Check this stat out. Oklahoma State's only given up 86 points combined in second halves of Big 12 play this season. That's like 9.5 points per game in the second half. So if you're Texas, you definitely don't want to go into a second half behind against them. The intensity, the effort, and the killer instinct that we saw against the Texas Tech on Friday night, that's got to carry over for Texas. If it doesn't, they're going to end up in another dogfight type game. And let's be honest, Gundy is not a dude you want to be dicking around with in one of those tight dogfight type of games. On paper, this game is a no-brainer. We talked about that on Tuesday. We also talked about how games aren't played on paper. There's a lot of stuff against Coach Sark and the Texas Longhorns in this one. Sark has never beaten Gundy, and he's lost 2 painfully shitty games, second half games against Oklahoma State. Texas has been just absolutely terrible, abysmal, awful, whatever word you want to use to describe it, against Oklahoma State for about a decade now. I think Oklahoma State's won 7 of the last 10. I love Texas's depth in this game, though. I love Texas's depth all season. We saw it in that game against Texas Tech. They're loaded with players, a lot of guys that can play. So I think Texas definitely has a depth advantage in this game. There's 2 really big matchups in this game for me. You got Ollie Gordon versus that really stout Texas run defense. And then you got Texas's run game against a really bad Oklahoma State run defense. As of this morning, Texas was a 15.5-point favorite. That seems crazy to me. I feel like that is a ton of points. I feel like Texas is going to get it done, but I think this game's a lot closer than the stats and that betting line would indicate. I got Texas winning this game really, really close, 27-23 over Oklahoma State. But the Horn Takes podcast score predictor tells a different story. It says Texas run away with this game 38-15. So once again, we're at odds. We've seen this a couple times where what I think is going to happen and what the score predictor says is going to happen are really way off. We've only got a couple days to find out who was right. Let's talk about some Texas Big 12 accolades. Man, they cleaned up this year. Let's run down. This list's going to take us a minute, too. T'Vondre Sweat wins Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. I don't know how they could give that to anybody else. That dude just absolutely dominated the conference. Adonai Mitchell, Offensive Newcomer of the Year. Anthony Hill Jr., Defensive Freshman of the Year. Byron Murphy, Defensive Lineman of the Year. Xavier Worthy was a first-team wide receiver and a first-team returner. Jatavion Sanders, first-team tight end. Excuse me. Kelvin Banks Jr., first-team offensive line. Bert Auburn, first-team place kicker. T'Vondre Sweat, first-team defensive line. Byron Murphy, first-team defensive line. Jalen Ford, first-team linebacker. Jalen Ford was a lot of people's favorite to be the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. Everybody on the planet, except for that dude's mom from K-State, thought that Jalen Ford should have been the Big 12 Player of the Year defensively last season. Jonathan Brooks, despite being out for the final 2 games of the season, as second-team running back. Adonai Mitchell, second-team wide receiver. Jahdae Barron, second-team defensive back. And then listen to all these honorable mentions. Kelvin Banks Jr. was honorable mention for Offensive Lineman of the Year. C.J. Baxter was honorable mention for Offensive Freshman of the Year. Jonathan Brooks was an honorable mention for Offensive Player of the Year. Terrence Brooks was an honorable mention DB, all Big 12. Ethan Burke was an honorable mention defensive lineman, all Big 12. Trill Carter, transfer out of Minnesota, was an honorable mention for defensive newcomer of the year. Keaton Crawford was honorable mention for special teams player of the year. Alfred Collins was honorable mention for D-line. My boy, Alfred Collins. Quinn Ewers, honorable mention QB. Gunnar Helm, honorable mention tight end. Anthony Hill, honorable mention linebacker. Christian Jones, honorable mention offensive line. Jake Majors, honorable mention offensive line. Ryan Sanborn, honorable mention punter. Barron Sorrell, honorable mention defensive line. Michael Taff, honorable mention DB. Jaron Thompson, honorable mention DB. Jordan Whittington, honorable mention wide receiver. It's like almost every starter on Texas's team was honorable mention for all Big 12. So congratulations to all those young men. Listen, folks, this is what you talk about when you talk about the job Steve Sarkisian has done, bringing in talent, layering talent in behind it, and developing that talent. This is why the argument of Texas has always gotten big recruiting classes and really good recruiting classes is a stupid ass argument. Because Steve Sarkisian knows what to do with these guys once he gets them. Night and day difference. I'm not going to go back and look at it, but I bet you in 2020, there wasn't a lot of guys on this all Big 12 list for the University of Texas. Let's talk about this playoff committee, y'all. It is an absolute dumpster fire. It is a clown show. It is a fuck. It is like every single phrase you can think of to describe something that's just so laughably stupid. Let's talk about it a little bit. So the big debates obviously are about the one-loss teams. There's 4 one-loss teams right now. You got Oregon sitting at number 5. You got Ohio State sitting at 6. Texas sitting at 7. And then you got Bama sitting at 8. So those are your 4 one-loss teams. And listen, this is what the selection committee says. This is what the committee says they do. This is how they evaluate teams. Listen to this really carefully. The selection committee ranks the teams based on the members' evaluation of the team's performance on the field using conference championships won, strength of schedule, head-to-head results, and comparison of results against common opponents to decide among teams that are comparable. So for those of y'all that need to hear this a different way, they have these criteria that are outlined in that statement, and that's what the committee says they follow to determine how they rank comparable teams. To me, comparable in this instance means how many losses you've had. So when the committee compares all these one-loss teams, those criteria are the criteria that they say they're using to compare them and rank them. So let's kind of go down this list. Conference championships won. That's the first criteria they use. Supposed to use. How in the hell is Ohio State ranked above Texas and Alabama? They aren't even in their conference championship game. Therefore, they cannot win a conference championship, which means they cannot even meet the first criteria that the committee is supposedly using to rank teams' performance on the field. That's a quote. So right off the bat, they're already not following their criteria to rank these 4 one-loss teams. Strength of schedule is the second criteria that they say they use. I think you can toss Ohio State out because they don't even meet the first criteria. So like Ohio State is not making the college football playoff. If they do, it's just pure and utter sham. Like, just disband the whole thing. Let's go back to the BCS era. Let's go back to the Bowl Alliance. At least those were computers, not stupid ass people. So the strength of schedule for the 3 remaining, when we toss Ohio State out, because they're not going to be conference champs, don't even have a chance to be conference champs. The 3 remaining teams' strength of schedules, Oregon, and these are according to ESPN. I haven't looked at Sagarin, which I should have. And I know Texas is higher in the Sagarin rating. Texas and Alabama, both higher in the Sagarin ratings than they are in this ESPN poll or ESPN rating. But we'll just compare them because I saw a graphic. Oregon, according to ESPN, 62nd ranked strength of schedule in the land. So basically like right in the middle of all the 130, however plus teams there are in college football. Texas 13th. Alabama 31st. So, based on these first two criteria, why in the hell is Oregon ranked against Texas and Alabama? None of them are conference champions yet. However, all three of them are playing in their conference championship games. So the third criteria should be strength of schedule. And if you can count it all, they've got Texas behind Oregon. They got Alabama behind Texas and Oregon. What it should look like is Texas, Bama, Oregon. Clearly. Then you look at the head-to-head results. Which is the third criteria. Only two of these one-loss teams have played each other. That's Texas and Alabama. Texas beat Alabama in week 2 on the road in Tuscaloosa at night by double digits and finished the game in victory formation. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the way the committee has Texas and Alabama ranked in comparison, in relation to each other right now. That's absolutely how it should be. So then we go down to the fourth criteria, which is comparison of results against common opponents. The only one-loss teams with a common opponent are Oregon and Texas. Their common opponent is Texas Tech. Oregon beat Texas Tech 38-30 on a last-second pick six, where just a few minutes earlier than that, Texas Tech had an opportunity to punch it in for 2 to tie the game. So this game was 31-30, actually to win the game. They were trying to win the game. So this game was 31-30. Very late in the game. And with a few seconds left, Oregon gets a pick six. Fair enough. That's a road win. You'll take that all day long, right? Texas absolutely beat the fucking brakes off of Texas Tech, 57-7. Never was in danger of, I mean, that game was over the second the ball got kicked off. So again, why is Oregon ranked ahead of Texas? There's not a single criteria that the College Football Playoff Committee supposedly looks at where Oregon is ahead or should be ahead of Texas or Alabama. I think you have to assume, obviously they go off the reservation and do whatever they want. So what's another category that we think they might look at? How about wins against ranked opponents? Oregon has one win over a ranked opponent, number 20 Oregon State. And I think these are rankings for today. Texas has 2 wins against ranked opponents. One of them is those number 8 Alabama Crimson Tide. The other one, number 25 K-State, with our backup quarterback. Alabama is better than both those teams at ranked wins. So again, how in the hell is Oregon ranked ahead of Texas and Alabama? We're fixing to find out. When asked about Oregon being ranked ahead of Texas by Reese Davis, the committee chairman, Boo Corrigan, had this to say. Bo Nix is completing 78% of his passes. Oregon held Oregon State to 7 points when Oregon State has averaged 34 points per game. He went on to mention the very close loss to Washington. That was his answer. Where in the criteria is an individual player's completion percentage? Where does that show up in the criteria? Where in the criteria that the committee is supposedly using to rank these teams, does it ever mention the weight of a loss, the strength of a loss? It doesn't. You know what he didn't say at all? You know what words never came out of his mouth? Strength of schedule, results against common opponents. Like, if you follow the criteria that the College Football Playoff Committee is supposed to follow, and they claim they follow, Oregon is clearly the least impressive one-loss team. It's not even close. And the reason this is important, not just as a Texas fan, this should be important to all fans. The committee has very clear criteria that they should be following. And if they're not going to follow them, what is the point of having the committee? Here's my take on how all this playoff nonsense works out in the end. I think the winner of the Pac-12 is in. I think the Pac-12 runner-up is out, unless maybe Washington lost a super, super close, kind of crazy, fluky game against Oregon. And then, even then, I don't think it really matters. I think the committee's in love with Oregon, and they are not in love with Washington. The only reason Washington is up there today is because they are undefeated. I think Florida State's going to get in if they win, unless Bama beats Georgia really convincingly in the SEC championship game. You already got people out there talking about you can't leave Georgia out, even if they lose. Because you can't tell me Georgia isn't one of the 4 best teams. And you obviously can't leave the SEC champion, a one-loss SEC champion, out of the college football playoff. So let Bama steamroll Georgia. It doesn't matter what Florida State does. They'll be out. And it'll be Alabama and Georgia facing off against probably Michigan, probably Oregon. I think Michigan's in if they win, obviously. I think they're probably in if they lose. For Texas, number one, they need to get a win, and then they're going to need some help. Again, they need Florida State to lose, and they need to win. I think if those two things happen, Texas will be in the college football playoff, unless Bama beats the brakes off Georgia. I saw something really interesting on Twitter this morning. Klatt thinks that Texas needs to be rooting for Bama because if Bama gets in, they will pull Texas into the playoff because Texas beat them. Folks, I think Joel Klatt, I love Joel Klatt. Joel Klatt has said less than 5 things ever about college sports that I didn't agree with, about college football that I didn't agree with. But I think he's out of his fucking mind on this one. Like, way out of his mind. There is no damn way that if Alabama beats Georgia, that both of those teams do not get in. He has way more faith in this committee than I do. Ultimately, I think your playoff teams are going to be Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, Texas. I hope I'm right about that. It would sure be awesome to see these Texas Longhorns make their first run into the college football playoff. We're getting on a plane Saturday morning. We're going to go to Arlington. We're going to watch this game, and then we're getting on a plane. And we're headed back home. If you guys see us at the Big 12 championship game, come up and shake my hand, introduce yourselves. I really appreciate it. We'll do Exaggeration Monday on Monday. The final playoff selection show is this Sunday at 11 a.m. Central. We'll either be celebrating our first playoff berth or we'll be bitching about how stupid the committee is. We probably do both, honestly. We'll have some random college football thoughts as well. Check out the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. Follow and subscribe. Won't cost you guys a thing. We appreciate it. Email me at horntakespodcast@gmail.com with all your questions, comments, and concerns and criticisms. I love all that shit. You guys have a good one. Let's beat Oklahoma State. Get hooked.